delivering the world to your doorstep. From breaking news to in-depth features, from politics to culture, from science to sports. Welcome to SNN Primetime News with Kennedy Lucas Patterson.
TikTok sued for massive invasion of child privacy. The U.S. government has filed a new lawsuit against TikTok, accusing the social media company of unlawfully collecting children's data and failing to respond when parents tried to delete their children's accounts. The Department of Justice said the firm's practices amounted to a massive-scale invasion of child privacy, in defiance of laws that require online companies to obtain parental consent to gather information for those under the age of 13. Officials said the firm, and parent company ByteDance, were repeat offenders, noting a similar case brought in 2019. TikTok disputed the claims and said it was proud of its efforts to protect children. It said it proactively removed underage users and had voluntarily put in place protections, such as default screen time limits and additional privacy guards for minors. "We disagree with these allegations, many of which relate to past events and practices that are factually inaccurate or have been addressed," a spokesperson said. "We are proud of our efforts to protect children, and we will continue to update and improve the platform." The complaint ramps up the pressure on TikTok and Chinese parent company ByteDance, which were already battling the U.S. over a law that threatens to ban the company from the country. In the filing, the U.S. accused TikTok of implementing deficient ways of screening for accounts created by children and obstructing parents when they tried to delete them. A review of 1,700 requests from parents to cancel accounts that were made between 2019 and 2020 found that 30% were still active in November 2021, according to the filing. It said moderators charged with reviewing accounts flagged as underage were only authorized to act if they saw explicit admission of a child's age, while being given limited access to user videos. It said they typically had only a few seconds to make their decisions. Officials asked the court to order a stop to TikTok's actions and determine penalties for each violation. This action is necessary to prevent the defendants, who are repeat offenders and operate on a massive scale, from collecting and using young children's private information without any parental consent or control, said Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General Brian Boynton, head of the Justice Department Civil Division. TikTok is among the most popular social media platforms in the world, claiming more than 1 billion users globally and more than 170 million in the U.S. Surveys by Pew Research have found that more than 60% of U.S. teens aged 13 to 17 use the platform, more than half of them on a daily basis. The lawsuit states the U.S. government seeks to put an end to TikTok's alleged unlawful massive-scale invasions of children's privacy. The company has faced fines in the UK and Europe over similar issues.
Industry Season 3, Why You Need to Watch the Most Cynical Show on TV. Set in the cutthroat world of UK high finance, Industry is a Gen Z succession that's as ruthless as it is entertaining. Here's why it deserves to be on your radar. Does anyone enter the world of high finance for altruistic reasons? Ha! That is a laughable idea in Industry, the most cynical show on television. Largely because of that cynicism, it's also one of the best. The series about young professionals at the London branch of Pierpoint, a major investment bank, is ruthlessly clear-eyed about the cutthroat nature of its business and the competitiveness of its characters who are, if we're being charitable, ethically challenged. If we're being blunt, they are very attractive snakes, slithering around and selling each other out in an atmosphere of high-tension trades and privileged lives fueled by sex and drugs. It's fascinating and great fun to watch. One scene in the new, third installment captures the show in its essence. Yasmin, Marissa Abella, an heiress who works at Pierpoint, does lines of cocaine with her boss, Eric, Ken Leung, obviously a bad idea for many reasons. In a heart-to-heart about Harper, Myha'la, Yasmin's friend and the person Eric mentored before he fired her at the end of last series, Yasmin says, "I think that deep down Harper is a good person." Eric answers, "I don't think she is." They are definitely high because industry viewers know that question is pointless, good and bad don't figure into anyone's calculations in the show. That doesn't mean its characters are unsympathetic. Over 2 seasons we have seen how damaged they are emotionally, which doesn't excuse their betrayals and manipulations, but does give us license to root for them. Few shows have been better at making us like people who behave in unlikable ways. There are precedents. Industry is often compared to Succession, with its high-stakes business deals and cold-blooded characters, and to Euphoria, full of Gen Z sex and drugs. Both comparisons make some sense, but Industry has its own sharp tone and dynamic. The show's glisteningly cold, upscale office setting is far from Euphoria's grimness. And it has a mix of races and social classes that Succession doesn't. Harper is a middle-class Black American and Robert, Harry Lottie, a working-class white British scholarship boy trying to blend in at Pierpoint. Their backgrounds at times pop up to haunt them as they struggle for upward mobility, a widely relatable theme. In the new episodes, Industry is bolder than ever, offering an entirely fresh take on environmentalism, of all the unlikely subjects. Kit Harington, a high-profile addition to the cast, plays Lord Henry Muck, at times a bit of a sexist pig but also ultra-rich and charming. He has started a green energy company called Lumi, which Pierpoint is taking public with an IPO. More important, the storyline raises the fundamental issue of whether public good and making money can coexist. The smooth-talking Henry says both things can be true. People around him are more skeptical. Financial watchdogs and competitors wonder if any green company can be viable financially. Eric calls the people behind such companies just a bunch of suits cosplaying environmentalists. Themes of climate change and environmentalism usually come as earnest warnings on screen, but in its typically cynical way, Industry dares to upset any easy assumptions. As the trailer has already revealed, there is a sexual charge between Henry and Yasmin, which may or may not go deeper. In Industry, sometimes sex is just fun and sometimes a commodity to be traded like any other stock. But true romance isn't out of the question. Robert has been pining for Yasmin for years, and she has relied on him as a loyal friend with whom she is also happy to flirt. The season teases out a possible romance, or at least a hookup, between them at last, complicated by Henry. He has his quirks, but as Harrington plays him, he is also somebody's idea of Prince Charming, with an irresistible smile and a pile of an ancestral house that adds an even more opulent layer to the show about money and power. The returning characters remain themselves, but more so. Harper, at a new company, becomes Pierpoint's unscrupulous competitor. Maybe she was always a snake, maybe she learned it from Eric. He is still at Pierpoint, fearfully gaslighting and betraying anyone who gets in his way, but Yasmin and Robert are now the show's focus. Her daddy and his mummy issues are intense. We first see Yasmin on her father's yacht, called the Lady Yasmin, where things quickly become traumatic. Back in London, Rob sneaks out of bed with a young woman from Pierpoint to visit Nicole, Sarah Parrish, the rich, older woman who has sexually harassed him. Yasmin and Robert make some terrible choices, but they also emerge as the most sympathetic figures. No one has a heart of gold in Industry, but these two often seem outwitted by more manipulative and savvier game players. By season's end, a viewer's heart could break for both of them. The whiff of sentimentality in the Yasmin-Robert story, suggesting the high cost of ruthless ambition, is rare in the show, with its unsparing take on society. The new episodes depict how sexist stereotypes persist, for example. Eric, worst mentor ever, makes Robert yell, "I'm a man and I'm relentless," his idea of a pep talk. Rishi, Sagar Radia, their intense colleague at Pierpoint, has a big gambling problem. His wife yells at him, "Do you know what being a man is?" She is not 100 years old, and it seems a weirdly backward-looking accusation from a young woman, but it's in line with the toxic gender assumptions that are never far from the surface in Industry's world. In a final bold move, Industry seems to blow up its own plots, with all the characters facing such major changes that the show would have to be reconstructed to go on. One of its executive producers recently told Vulture she hopes for more seasons. HBO isn't saying. We're left to puzzle out how the pieces of this explosive, thrilling series might be put back together, a fun game in itself.
Fake caller app shut after thieves duped thousands. The UK's National Crime Agency has shut down an online platform that it says was used by criminals to steal money from thousands of people around the world. The Russian comms platform allowed fraudsters to pretend to be callers from a bank or telecoms firm in order to steal money or personal details, the NCA said. The body said that between 2021 and 2024, over 1.3 million calls were made by Russian comms users to 500,000 unique UK phone numbers. About 170,000 people in the UK are believed to be victims, with the average reported loss more than £9,400. The NCA said the platform had been used to make calls to people in 107 different countries around the world, although it did not give an estimate for how many global victims there were. The agency said it had arrested 3 people over the platform, who have been released on conditional bail. The Russian comms platform was established in 2021. It was available as a handset and then a web app, and allowed the user to make calls that suggested they were coming from a reputable company. Some of the scams included criminals, spoofing the number of a bank to pretend to be a legitimate caller, before persuading the victim to transfer money out of their account. Fraudsters also impersonated companies to steal money for goods that were never delivered. The NCA said the handset could only be used to make spoofed calls, although it was loaded with fake apps to make it look like an everyday smartphone. The web app cost £350 a month, with payments to be made using cryptocurrency. The NCA said fraud now accounts for about 40% of all crime against individuals in England and Wales, with over 80% of it believed to be technology-enabled. Criminals are increasingly using technology to carry out fraud and other crimes on an industrial scale, causing very real harm to victims in the UK and across the world, said Adrian Searle, director of the National Economic Crime Centre within the NCA. The NCA and our partners here in the UK and overseas are going after both the criminals and the technology they exploit. Earlier this year, police broke up a gang accused of using a technology service that helped criminals use fraudulent text messages to steal from victims. The LabHost site allowed scammers without technical skills to bombard victims with messages designed to trick them into making payments online.
The genius of singer who was ahead of her time then disappeared. Connie Converse failed to find fame as a singer-songwriter in the 1950s, then mysteriously disappeared without a trace. On the 100th anniversary of her birth and approaching the 50th anniversary of her disappearance, she's now remembered as a great lost talent. In January 1961, an unknown Bob Dylan arrived in Greenwich Village with a guitar in his hand and $12 in his pocket, on his way to revolutionizing popular music with his poetic personal songs. Maybe he brushed past Connie Converse as she went the other way. She moved out of the New York neighborhood that same month, after a decade of struggling to get significant attention for her own intimate, sophisticated and beautiful songs. There is a parallel universe where Converse was the one who got the big break, and she is a household name. At least, that's the theory put forward in a recent book called How to Become Famous, not a manual, but about why some talented people become successful and others stay in the shadows. It imagines a world where Converse is widely known as the most original, and perhaps the greatest, of the folk singers of the 1950s and 1960s, who influenced everyone from Dylan to Taylor Swift, and for whom a Nobel Prize is not out of the question. Musician and author Howard Fishman, who published Converse's biography, To Anyone Who Ever Asks, last year, also thinks Converse could have made it big. I love to think about an alternate reality in which Connie Converse's music did receive the recognition it deserved in its own time, and she became recognized for the musical genius that she was, quote, he says. I almost think a better version of American cultural history could have happened, had that been the case. But How to Become Famous author Cass Sunstein concedes that Converse wasn't better than Dylan. She also faced barriers because she was a woman, and perhaps her clever, melodic and mostly melancholic songs just never quite had mass appeal. They dealt with subjects like loneliness, promiscuity, quarreling lovers, and frequenting saloons in the afternoons. It's certainly hard to imagine them really catching on in the early 50s, an age dominated by schmaltzy crooners, folk purists and show tunes. She didn't sound like anybody else that was making music in her own day, quote, says Fishman. And she doesn't sound like anybody else making music now, to my ears. British singer Vashti Bunyan became a Connie Converse convert after a recommendation from US DJ David Garland, the first person to play her songs in 2004. I couldn't believe that they were recorded so long ago, it was the 1950s, quote, Bunyan says. And just to hear her speaking in a way that I would have always wanted to speak was very moving. She was completely ahead of her time, and it must have been very hard for her. She must have felt isolated. If she had any ambition for her songs, she must have known how good they were, how clever and funny and wonderful they were, and poetic. But other people didn't seem to recognize that kind of genius writing at the time. Bunyan knows what it's like to have her music rediscovered decades later. She released an album in 1970, which has gained cult status in more recent years. She says their stories are very different, but agrees there is an allure to the idea of the discovery of something from so long ago. And how lucky that she was recorded, quote, she says. Connie was recorded by her friends, and none of those recordings were supposed to be commercially released. But it's so wonderful that they have been found. And it makes you wonder about all the other people that weren't. Converse was recorded at the home of one of her friends and champions, Jean Deach, but she never released any music in her time. She performed for small groups of supporters, but never played a proper concert. She made one TV appearance, but that led nowhere. Ellen Steckert, a folk historian who was also performing in the 1950s, believes Converse was just too different to have made it. I think she was wonderful. I think she was totally out of sequence of any kind of cultural impulse, quote, she says. She was self-contained and also self-isolated. It was too bad somebody could not break through that. Converse did have her supporters, but any female singer at that time needed to be backed by a man with the right connections, Steckert says. And Converse was socially awkward and not good at self-promotion. Unfortunately, she didn't have much social understanding of things. She did not have a very good rapport, I think, with people. Evidently, she had very bad teeth, and her body odor also was fairly prominent. And those are two factors in middle-class America that will make sure you don't make it any place. Converse worked for a printing company and then for the Institute of Pacific Relations. After leaving New York in 1961, she became editor of the Journal for Conflict Resolution in Michigan, and her intellectual activities and peace and anti-racism activism were highly regarded. But then, her life seemed to lose purpose and direction. On 10 August 1974, a week after her 50th birthday, she posted letters to family and friends, telling them she was returning to New York. She drove out of Ann Arbor and has not been heard from since. Neither her body nor her car was found. As far as we know, she never made it to New York, quote, Fishman says. As far as we know, she never made it anywhere. I'd love to think that she started a new life somewhere else, and that she lived more years. But who knows? Quote, on Saturday 3 August, exactly 100 years after Converse's birth, Fishman is in her hometown Concord, New Hampshire, for a ceremony to give the singer her first official recognition. Her music has gradually spread over the past 20 years. So too has her story, and the mystery of her disappearance is often the first thing that gets people's attention. The unfortunate and darkly poetic thing is that she needed to disappear in order for us to see her, quote, Fishman says. That was the hook that was needed for us to pay attention to her. But what I always say is, don't focus on how she disappeared, focus on how she lived, because her life is so much more fascinating and meaningful, and has so much more to teach us than the fact that at age 50, she felt that she had to vanish.
Trump and Harris at odds over presidential debate. U.S. presidential candidates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are at odds over their first head-to-head debate, with each in favor of a different broadcaster and date. The Harris campaign is pushing for a debate to take place on ABC News on September 10th, in a slot previously scheduled for a debate between President Joe Biden and Mr. Trump. But Mr. Trump says the ABC debate has been terminated by Mr. Biden leaving the race and has instead pushed for himself and Ms. Harris to debate on Fox News on September 4th. The pair will face off for the presidency when the U.S. goes to the polls on November 5. The disagreement began after President Biden dropped out of the race on July 21, with Ms. Harris immediately becoming favorite to secure the Democratic nomination. Since then, Mr. Trump has been non-committal about whether he will still take part in the previously scheduled ABC News debate. U.S. TV networks have been negotiating with both campaigns to arrange new dates. On Friday night, Mr. Trump wrote on his social network Truth Social that he had accepted Fox News' proposal for a debate on September 4, which is penciled to take place in Pennsylvania, a key battleground state. He wrote that the moderators would be Fox News' Brett Baier and Martha MacCallum and that the rules would be similar to his debate with Mr. Biden. If for any reason Kamala is unwilling or unable to debate on that date, I have agreed with Fox to do a major town hall on the same September 4 evening, he wrote. Mr. Trump added that the prior agreement has been terminated because Joe Biden is no longer taking part and because his defamation case against the broadcaster would mean there is a conflict of interest. The Harris campaign has responded saying the former president is running scared and is trying to back out of the agreed debate. They said he's looking to Fox News, a conservative cable network, to bail him out. He needs to stop playing games and show up to the debate he already committed to on September 10, Michael Tyler, Harris campaign communications director said. Ms. Harris followed up on social media, saying it is interesting how any time, any place becomes one specific time, one specific safe space. I'll be there on September 10, like he agreed to, she wrote. Ms. Harris's team said they are open to discussing further debates, but only after the agreed one takes place. If and when the next debate does happen, it will be keenly watched to see how the two contenders match up. Ms. Harris secured enough pledges to become the Democratic nominee on Friday. During a campaign rally in Atlanta on Wednesday, Ms. Harris challenged Mr. Trump to debate her, saying, "If you got something to say it to my face." The debate news comes just hours after a report by the Homeland Security Department revealed that the U.S. Secret Service made mistakes in their response to the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Ms. Harris, who was then Vice President-elect, came within 20 feet (6 meters) of a viable pipe bomb planted outside the Democratic National Committee's headquarters in Washington. That bomb and a similar one found at the Republican National Committee headquarters were placed near the buildings the night before Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. It remains unclear who planted both pipe bombs.
And Olympic road cycling champions' favorite Italian biking adventures. Alberto Bettiol is racing for Italy at the Paris Olympics but can't wait to head home for a joyride. Here are his top Italian rides, from pilgrimage trails to e-biking through Rome. Many visitors come to Italy for the art, others for the food. But wander outside its masterpiece-filled museums and the world-renowned restaurants in its jewel-like cities to find astounding natural landscapes of massive lakes, rugged mountain ranges and idyllic hills dotted with postcard-perfect villages. In short, a cyclist's dream. Italy's 20 regions are crisscrossed with excellent bike trails, nourishing a thriving cycling industry. We asked Alberto Bettiol, a competitive road cyclist with the UCI World Team EF Education EasyPost and a Tuscan native, for his top Italian cycling adventures. Cycling is popular in Italy, says Bettiol. We have a tradition of cycling since the early 1900s, starting with Lirco Guerra and, of course, Gino Bartali. Bettiol, who recently competed in the Giro d'Italia, the Tour de France and won the 2024 Milan-Turin race, is now representing Italy in the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. Then I'm heading back to Tuscany, he says. I'm finally gonna have time off. For professional cyclists, it's difficult to define home because you're almost always outside. But as soon as possible, I go home to Castelfiorentino. For Bettiol, being in Italy means tackling its bike trails for pleasure, not points, and refueling at the culinary pit stops along the way. It's good to see Florence, Siena, Pisa, says Bettiol. But in Italy, there are small towns full of history, beautiful scenery, and great food. And behind the food there's always a story. Here are Bettiol's top cycling adventures in Italy. With its rolling hillside and exquisite Renaissance architecture, Bettiol's native Tuscany is on every Italophile's bucket list, with the hordes of tourists to prove it. Tuscany is also the champion's first pick for cycling experiences, particularly for its picturesque Strada Bianca, white gravel roads, that wind through the hills. Bettiol's Giro di Tuscany starts in the medieval city of Siena, famed for its Palio horse race, which thunders twice a year through the cavernous Piazza del Campone on July 2 and August 16, then heads south through the russet-colored villages of the Val d'Orcia Valley, Montalcino, Pienza, and Montepulciano. Val d'Orcia is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, he says. You can go wine tasting in Montalcino and try Pienza's famous pecorino cheese. Pecorino di Pienza cheese is softer and milder than its sharp Roman counterpart, making a delightful companion to Montalcino's toothsome red Brunello wine. Bettiol likes to drop his kickstand at Montalcino's Ciocchi Piccolomini di Aragono winery. You can name a wine Brunello di Montalcino only if it's grown in Montalcino, he notes. A ride through Val d'Orcia can take several hours or even a weekend. You can't make a mistake if you stay at an Airbnb or agritourism over there, says Bettiol. They're all beautiful and, I'm pretty sure, all serve food made by grandmothers. That's an experience, too. While Bettiol mostly cycles on the open road, he's also a fan of a gritty Italian urban bike experience, and it doesn't get much more Italian urban than Rome. Rome is beautiful, says Bettiol. You've got to do Rome by bike. The Eternal City is eternally tourist, but according to Bettiol, whizzing past the iconic monuments and heat-struck crowds on two wheels gives the city a whole new flavor. But Rome is so chaotic, he admits. You have to pay attention there to avoid the holes in the asphalt. There are a lot of electric scooters and taxi drivers, crazy. It's a busy, busy city. Nonetheless, Bettiol loves losing himself in Rome's ancient streets and soaking up the bittersweet cacophony of crumbling Roman ruins peeking through Baroque piazzas and Renaissance-era palaces. And, of course, refueling with Rome's famous traditional pasta dishes. You have to eat traditional Roman dishes like bucatini all'amatriciana and cacio e pepe, says Bettiol. I love having dinner next to the Colosseum. Italy's cycling culture started in the early 1900s, but this ancient pilgrimage route, and now, recreational hiking and biking trail, dates to the 6th century. Starting in Canterbury, England, the Via Francigena led medieval pilgrims to Rome's holy sites via France and Switzerland and finally snaking through Italy to end in the country's southern Apulia region. Bettiol has watched pilgrims and cyclists making their way through the section of Via Francigena that passes through Castelfiorentino his entire life. It's incredible how many people do it, he says. When you imagine this road being built from Canterbury to Rome, it's incredible. Ancient history. Whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter because you see these amazing landscapes. Though the trail spans a whopping 1,700 kilometers and crosses all manner of alpine, forest, lake and hill terrain, including some of the oldest roads in Europe, modern-day pilgrims and adventurers have it immeasurably easier than their humble predecessors ever did. The Via Francigena now teems with sponsored hostels, bed and breakfasts, airrooms, restaurants and well-stocked service stations. Everything is tracked, says Bettiol, referring to the trail's various GPS checkpoints. So you don't get lost. Another part of Italy that I really like is the Lang area, south of Turin, says Bettiol. There are hills that remind me of Tuscany, but steeper. And there's beautiful wine. Beautiful food, too. The Lang area is found in Italy's lower Piedmont region, between the River Pa and the Ligurian Apennines, swoon-worthy countryside ideal for a romantic weekend, says Bettiol, bike in the morning and wine taste in the evening. Perfect. Bettiol's cycling adventure for 2 starts in the town of Alba, famed for its white truffles. That's where the uphill climb begins, he says. It's this landscape full of steep hills, vineyards and little towns with little castles on top of little hills. Among the city's detours are the historic Ferrero factory, producer of Nutella, the heavenly aroma wafting through the streets. You can also visit Turin, says Bettiol. It's not so far. It's an important city, the historical city of Fiat. But Bettiol's favorite Lang area pit stop is the 5-star relay San Maurizio in the town of Santo Stefano Belbo. It's not so cheap, he warns. But it's beautiful. It's an old hilltop monastery converted into a relais, luxury chateau. You're surrounded by vineyards and you have breakfast in this old deconsecrated church. There's a spa with water from the Black Sea. There's a Michelin star restaurant, too. First you suffer on the bike, then you relax. The crystalline lakes of northern Italy are famously home to celebrity villas, but where tourists see a cheeky selfie, Bettiel sees a week-long bike trip. Bettiel suggests starting from Lake Maggiore, studded by the three Borromean islands, once owned by the Ducal Borromeo family. Next, hit Lake Lugano and, a brisk 39 kilometers pedal later, Lake Como. George Clooney's villa, of course, all the actors' villas, says Bettiel. But once you get to Lake Como, going north, you'll find Bellagio. That's a little town, it's a famous, historic climb to get up there. Huff up 9 kilometers from Bellagio to the sanctuary of La Madonna del Gasello, the patron saint of cyclists, and the Museo del Ciclismo, where Bettiel says you'll find old jerseys and learn about the sport's history. Finally, heading 180 kilometers southeast, is Lake Garda. The biggest lake in Italy, says Bettiel. The loop is more than 200 kilometers. You find beautiful towns, like Sirmione. Then you go north into the Trentino region and eat polenta, savory cornmeal, perfect in the wintertime when it's cold. There's lots of bars up there, it's great for cyclists. For accommodation, Bettiel recommends the 5-star Lethe Resort and Spa on Garda Lake in the town of Gargnano, and his two-wheeled chariots of choice are a regular road bike, e-bike, or electric road bike. The lakes are big, he says. So you can go faster. When summer hits, tourists come to Italy, Italians head north to the Dolomites. The Dolomites, a mountain range arching through northeastern Italy, are the quintessential Italian escape for their excellent gastronomy, endless outdoor adventures and cool summer temps, rarely breaking 25°C. You have to be prepared because the climbs are long and tough, says Bettiel. But I love the Dolomites. Bettiel recommends taking a week to enjoy the area's climbs and mighty mountain passes. You start with Celaranda, says Bettiel. Then Passo Pordoi, Passo Valparola, Passo Sella. If you go to Val di Fassa you can go to San Pellegrino. We go there every year with the Giro d'Italia. Bettiel also loves Livigno in the heart of the Valtellina Valley, affectionately called the Tibet of Italy. There's great cycling there, and you'll find professional riders, says Bettiel. Like me, I've been cycling there since 2011. And you're close to Tirano, where you can catch the Bernina Express. This train chugs through Switzerland's most jaw-dropping alpine landscapes, splendid gorges and epic glaciers, a delight to ride instead of pedal. When I retire from cycling, maybe I'll work in tourism, muses Bettiel. I like explaining these things to tourists.